As you might have heard, Samsung had their Galaxy Unpacked event a couple of days ago and released a whole range of new products. We're going to be focusing on their two brand new foldable devices today, the Galaxy Z Fold 3 and the Z Flip 3. So let's get into it. So let's start with the Fold 3, and when you first look at this device, it really doesn't look that much different from the previous version. It really feels like Samsung are trying to perfect this design and not change it too much. There are a few visible changes. For example, the camera bump on the rear of the phone is now much smaller, and on the inside of the phone, there is no longer a hole punch camera. Instead, it's an under-display camera, but we'll get into that later. However, what's more important is the changes that Samsung have made which aren't visible. So for example, the gaps around the hinge are now much smaller, meaning that it's actually IPX8 water resistant. So it can survive up to 1.5 meters underwater for 30 minutes. That's pretty impressive. It still isn't dust resistant, so if dust gets inside the hinge and under the display, you might have some problems. Moving on to the screens, probably the most important part of these phones. And on the outside, not all that much has changed. You're getting a 6.2-inch display with an aspect ratio of 25:9, so a really tall display like it was on the previous phones. And also a refresh rate of 120 Hz, which is a welcome change because now you have more continuity between the outside and inside display, which also has 120 Hz. Now on the inside, you're still getting a massive 7.6-inch display, which unfortunately still seems like it's made out of plastic with some glass elements. Now Samsung do claim that it's up to 80% more resistant to scratches, which is pretty impressive if it's true. And that also means that they're confident enough for you to be able to use this with an S Pen. Samsung have released a special S Pen alongside the Fold 3 with a soft nib which retracts when you apply force to it. You can also use the S Pen Pro, which has a built-in setting specifically for the Fold 3. Unfortunately, Samsung specifically tells you not to use any other stylus with this phone, which is a bit annoying, but then you really don't want to scratch that really expensive display. I think it's a pretty useful feature, and finally people are going to be able to take notes on this display, which seems made for it. Now it does still seem quite experimental. For example, Samsung didn't build a way for you to store the pen on the actual phone, so you're either going to have to buy a special case for it or just have it loose in your pocket with the Fold. That's a bit annoying, but hopefully we will see improvements on the next generation. For cameras on this phone, on the rear you're getting a wide, a telephoto and an ultra wide, and then on the front display you're getting a hole punch selfie camera. You should expect that these will be pretty similar to Samsung's other flagships, so pretty good in general. On the inside is where it gets interesting because Samsung have actually implemented an under-display selfie camera. On the top right of the display, you'll see a small octagonal area with half the pixel density of the rest of the display. When you want to take a selfie, these pixels will turn off and the camera underneath should be able to see through the screen. Samsung have also used a defogging algorithm to make the pictures a little bit sharper, but from what I've seen, the pictures aren't all that great. The pictures are just a little bit hazy, and it definitely feels like this is a first generation feature. Hopefully it will be improved on the next generations. For the operating system, the Fold 3 will be shipping with Android 11 and One UI 3.5 over the top, and to be honest, not all that much has changed since the last generation. One cool new feature is that you can now have a permanent dock on the side or the bottom of the phone on the inside display, which is pretty cool. It almost feels like a desktop, which I think is a pretty cool feature. Now quickly for specs, it's going to be powered by the Snapdragon 888 5G. You're going to be able to choose from between 256 gigabytes or 512 gigabytes of storage. All options come with 12 gigabytes of RAM, and it's going to have a 4,400 mAh battery. which is actually a little bit smaller than the last generation, which is a bit of a surprise. So what's all of this going to cost? In the UK, it's going to be starting at £1,599, and in the US, $1,799. Now, that is really expensive, so this is definitely not something that most people are going to buy. It's going to be something for early adopters who really want to get their hands on the technology. It's still around £200 cheaper than the Fold 2, which indicates that Samsung is getting ready to sell these devices to a wider range of consumers. Hopefully on the next generation, we will see that price come down even more. But right now, it's pretty hard to recommend this device to an average consumer. So let's move on to the Flip 3, and this is a device that looks much more polished than its previous generation, and there isn't really anything you can point to specifically that makes it feel that way. It might be the more rounded edges or the color choices, but it feels much cleaner than the Flip 2. There are a few visible changes. For example, it's now much thinner when folded at just 17.1 millimeters at its thickest point, which is pretty impressive. It also has a much larger display on the outside, which in my opinion is much more useful than the tiny one we got on the Flip 2, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Like its big brother, it is also IPX8 water resistant, so it can survive up to 1.5 meters for 30 minutes, which is pretty impressive. Onto the displays. Now on the outside, you're getting a 1.9-inch display, which can show a variety of widgets, for example, the time, weather, or your fitness tracker, which are all pretty useful things. On the inside, you have a 6.7-inch display, which is 120 Hz, and also, like on the Fold 3, 80% more resistant to scratches, or so Samsung claims. If that figure's true, that's a big step to becoming more consumer friendly, because the durability of the screen was the main reason people were afraid to buy this phone in the first place. So for cameras on this phone, on the rear you're getting a wide and an ultra wide, and then on the inside of the phone you're getting a hole punch selfie camera. And like on the Fold 3, you should expect similar performance to Samsung's other flagships. What's cool is you can also use that display on the outside to take selfies like you could on the previous generation, but now it should be a lot easier with that larger display. So quickly for specs again, you're going to be getting the Snapdragon 888 5G between 128 and 256 gigabytes of storage, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and a 3300 milliamp hour battery. So what's the price of this phone? In the UK, it's going to be starting at £949, and in the US, $999. That's a surprisingly reasonable price considering that the Pro models of the iPhone are over £1,000 now. It really feels like Samsung want to make this a mainstream flagship. You also have to consider the research and development that's gone into this phone and the technology that you're getting with it. All things considered, I think £949 is a pretty reasonable price to pay. So the feeling I get from these two phones is that the Fold 3 is still definitely in its experimental phase. We're getting experimental features like the under-display selfie camera and the stylus. Both of those are very obviously first generation features and aren't very polished yet. Once again, hopefully they will be improved on the next generation. The Flip 3, however, does feel like a pretty polished phone. It doesn't have many experimental features apart from the folding display, and it also has a reasonable price, like we said. A folding phone like this isn't something that everyone needs, but the technology is starting to feel quite mature, which is a good thing for the whole industry. The release of these two phones will hopefully put pressure on other companies to release new technologies like this in the near future. And that's something that will benefit all of us. But right now, if I had to pick one phone from these two to recommend, I would definitely go for the Flip 3 because it just feels like a much more mature phone. So that's it this time, but if you liked it, please press the thumbs up button, and if you loved it, hit that subscribe button.